On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Zach LaValley. He is the EVP of Engineering at RapidSOS. We're going to be talking about transition towards holistic awareness. We're going to be diving into talking about data, disconnected data, public safety, with the lack of consistency across those distributed systems. We're going to try to get as far as we can. There's a lot of other questions and topics I want to explore with Zach, but I appreciate you being on the show and thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amir.
Awesome. RapidSOS. I know it's kind of a cornerstone of the conversation, but tell everyone what you guys do over there.
I think we provide an unsung hero of a service. Many of us don't realize that on your behalf, when you call 911, companies like RapidSOS and RapidSOS in particular moves data from your mobile device largely, but also a bunch of other IoT in the general ecosystem through the internet and to 911, so that they have more data at their disposal to make better decisions on your behalf. This started with location services, and so your phone knows pretty much exactly where you are. But the way that the industry emerged was through telephony, right? So we all had landlines 20, 30 years ago, and your landline doesn't move. And so it's very easy to understand where your phone was and where you are in relation to your phone when you were calling 911. As mobile became more pervasive and it is now ultra dominant in the space, triangulation off of cell towers started to become the norm. And that led to uncertainty circles of 50, 100 meters, which is fine if you're standing out in a field in the rural parts of America. Someone can probably find you, but in many of the urban or suburban denser neighborhoods, 50 meters is you or 16 of your apartment mates in the building or 3 of your next door neighbors. And when seconds matter in trying to respond to you, knowing that you're in your backyard having a heart attack is life-saving information. And so really that's where we emerged. And we've now grown to not only provide location services into 911, but a plethora of other informations, telematics, crash detection, video, a bunch of school safety information coming in as well. So that's really what we are. We're a conduit of the digital ecosystem into 911.
Awesome. I mean, that sounds like easier to explain than to probably comprehend the challenges. That does not seem easy, the evolution you just described, and maybe we'll pick through some of that. And obviously, you actually kind of maybe teed up the question. The first question is the evolution from locked landline, one location, to there's multiple devices, watch that has, cellular, GPS, telephone, other devices we carry. There's a lot of data points. I guess, when you're looking at this overall solution and as data is increasingly coming at you guys from different, facets and devices, how do you go about just identifying the right piece of data within what you guys need?
There's an awful lot. I will also just say that there's a hugely disconnected and disparate ecosystem in the 911 space to start with. So 911 is not federally consolidated. It's not even state consolidated. It is county. And so there are 6,000 or so 911 call centers across the country. Each of those is connected to multiple law enforcement fire agencies. So the disparity and the disconnect out is enormous. And so one of the first challenges is just to try to define the jurisdictional boundaries of each of these things, because by federal law, calls have to be routed, and accordingly, this data needs to be routed to the agency that should be responding to your call. And so a lot of what we do starts with really solid GIS mapping to be able to geolocate where a piece of information is emanating from and map that to who the right receiver of that information is, so that we abide by federal laws, and we also make sure that we don't create more hops in terms of transfer of, if we get it to your neighboring agency, they just need to transfer that over. And again, that's loss of time. So it's really important that we get the right information there. And so we're a cloud-based system, largely in Amazon and Azure. We are multi-zonal, sort of in US East, US West, load balanced across those, handling billions of payloads every single year. I think we support something on the order of 1 billion connected devices at this point, all alerting. And again, this isn't constant streaming. This is when there is something, we can tap into that feed or we get pushed that data. But yeah, that's where this sort of starts from. And again, it's finding who to route it to is actually probably the starting complexity.
I guess maybe to backtrack a little, it is interesting, as you mentioned, 6,000 different call centers. And I guess when you're looking at this problem, and obviously you guys can identify the right piece of data, if I am making a 911 call and I do have multiple devices, is there a scenario where you guys are picking the best appropriate device? Because obviously, my watch and my phone both have, technically cellular. I guess is that part of the complexity? I mean, forget that. There's a lot of complexity, but I was just curious when it comes to pinpointing, what data, because people are carrying multiple cellular capable devices these days.
Yeah, so we have arrangements and agreements with the OS providers of those devices. So Apple and Google are partners of ours. And so on the OS level, they are monitoring and helping make that cellular call. And so there's this point at which the dialer is up, you are dialing 911. The OS knows that. It then transfers, again, the responsibility of making that call to the carrier. So whether that be Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, whoever, they then have the responsibility of routing your audio call. The OS level knows that you dialed 911. And so that then becomes a relationship between Apple or Google with us. And they then send, and they have different mechanisms by which they do that. We do a cloud to cloud connection to say, what is the GPS location? What is the location of this caller? And we start to route that to the correct 911 jurisdiction. Once the 911 operator starts to interact with that, we can then have them request more information from the device, again, via us. So if you set up your, within Apple, you can have your medical ID and various medical records sort of set up and available. If you have made that available and sort of selected the correct things within your configuration settings, the 911 operator, if they deem that this is a medical emergency, because you might be calling in terms of a fire at your neighbor's house, but if deemed a medical emergency, the 911 operator can then request the medical information from your phone directly. We can then transport that into 911, and in some cases directly out to the first responders who will be showing up on your behalf. So that's a little bit of how the flow works between us. And all of it's kind of set up so that, again, privacy is a key component of this. We don't want to share any more data than is absolutely necessary, and we rely on people in the loop to sort of make those critical decisions, whether that be the 911 operator or first responders, to sort of request more information about you.
Are you seeing, when it comes to privacy, not that this is a privacy-focused discussion, but out of curiosity, are you seeing, as more data points have become available, the increase in discussion of where that line's drawn? Because obviously, if there are more granular components, it's going to help. But obviously, there's always that question.
It's interesting. It depends on who you talk to. So people who have utilized the system and been saved, or had their property saved by the information that was provided, are very thankful. Other people who are not users of the system or are just conceptually thinking about this, they go, they hum and haw, and they wonder how we're doing it. And this is where we sort of try to create as many checks and balances as we can. We try not to be the store of that information, right? So we're not just aggregating it so that it's all sitting in us. We just in time request that information from available information sources. So to give you another example, we might see that there's a phone call from 911 about a burglary. So the 911 call comes in. We understand the location of the caller. The 911 agent is hearing that this is about a burglary. on our map, you can see the jurisdiction and you can see where that caller is located. Also, a part of our system is we get a lot of video camera feeds from local business. So you can see where all the cameras are in relationship to that. And then the 911 operator can click on a particular camera, which will then request a feed from that camera. So it's not like all the feeds are coming in all at once and we're constantly monitoring. It's only available when there is, a reasonable request for help in a particular area. So that's how, again, some of that system works within us, and we really try to maintain privacy and sort of rely on the public safety agents to make the calls on what would be valuable information to aid in a particular situation.
Fault tolerant systems obviously are complex. This is one, when we say airplanes flying, there's always those systems where they cannot go down. And obviously, when you talk about fractions of a second saving lives, this is one of those cases. I guess from an engineering perspective, as you're looking at this and obviously it has to be fault tolerant, speed is critical. Those two things always don't go hand in hand. They're not always I'm sure you could get more fault tolerant but slower. That's probably easier. You get really fast, but it could break. How do you find that optimal balance? I mean, that's a big question of itself, but just as a baseline, what are some of the trade-offs that you need to start looking at from just an engineering perspective?
Well, so one of our earliest challenges in the way that we made early trade-offs here was we have to move at the speed of audio, right? So how fast do telephony calls connect? How much switching time is there between network traffic? And then how fast is information conveyed via a phone call, literally? And as long as we can be faster than that, that was kind of the speed threshold. So oftentimes our users say that they see the ding before they hear the ring. So on our map, you can see the little flag show up, indicating that a call is about to come. And then the phone will ring and, oh, okay, that's this. So that's kind of the speed with which we try to aim, is that we're at least as fast as the telephony audio call. From a fault tolerance perspective, we really strive to, maintain. Right now, we maintain about 4 nines. We're on a journey to reliably get to 5 nines. That is anybody in this space or anybody in the engineering space knows that journey is extremely difficult. So we're on that journey. Luckily, in the space that we're in, we are considered additional information, right? So the actual call for help is still the call. You can always still get the triangulation off the cell towers. That will naturally come in with the call. We are just additional, very helpful information. So we are abiding by the correct amount of uptime reliability that we need to, but we believe that in the future, this sort of digital footprint will actually become more reliable, more valuable than the audio call. I mean, literally, we are trying to save lives with a game of telephone when we could be trying to use pictures, images, sort of this more expressive data to highlight where things really are. So that's where we make these trade-offs. So if ever our focus on reliability forces us to have a dip where we feel like we are going to be slower than the phone call, then we rethink. But yeah, we're constantly trying to up those nines while maintaining that level of speed at all times.
I guess just something, I'm listening to, obviously, and I understand you guys aren't actually the, call center taking the call. They have a whole different responsibility. You guys are transferring the information. It is very much blurred line. As we're talking, I'm a layperson. I'm looking at this going, wow, this really gets tough in terms of the partnership. And I guess that's the tricky part. Left field question, because it popped in my head, and maybe someone out there is going to be thinking the same thing I am. So normally we see products tested, released. All right, something breaks. Okay. No one literally is going to suffer and maybe we'll be upset. There's a big difference. Instagram goes down. Okay, I'm angry. LinkedIn goes down. I'm angry. But in this case, when you go through testing, I'm actually just curious, selfishly, what's that testing process look like? And yeah, I'll just gonna leave that to there because I don't even really know much past that.
I mean, I think like any modern software company, right, starts with a solid cadre of unit tests, followed by integration tests, followed by contract tests. We've got a whole bunch of full suite regression tests. So again, as we're moving up the CI/CD pipeline, those things are just constantly running. Our team of QA engineers are then battering the system basically all the time, whether it's in production or not, trying to find where those flaws and those um, uh, again system issues are. And again, we don't really think about true defects. It's more, could this be misunderstood? What happens when you fat finger? It's the weird edge cases that the team is really trying to poke at. We then typically deploy in various forms of QA environments. So some of those are directly connected to some of our major partners, right? So we have dedicated environments where we test with Apple and Google if we're going to be doing major work or releases with them. We have a general sandbox environment with which we can give to our ECC partners, ECC emergency call centers. So we tend to have a pilot group, again, if we're doing new feature, new function, and not just, iteration, bug fix, security update kind of stuff. We do sandbox testing alongside of 911. And most recently, we are working on developing true canary deployment capabilities so that we can sort of ring deploy out through our 911 centers, try to catch things as early as possible and limit blast radius of anything kind of going south. So that is currently, my team is working on that as we speak, but not a new concept necessarily within the engineering community, but something that, again, we didn't do when we started 12 years ago, that we now are really sort of investing in to make sure that we can continue to iterate at speed and make sure that we don't have ripple effects.
Yeah, absolutely. That's obviously, as we're discussing this, and I'm thinking about other solutions and how they tackle it. And in this case, we haven't really touched on obviously where AI might start and end, or whether it even plays a role. Everyone wants to incorporate some component of artificial intelligence. I guess with you guys, there's a ton of data. You mentioned cameras that are accessible. You're trying to piece together a better view versus just the telephony piece. Is there a component where, and we could just talk about futuristic, it doesn't have to be you guys specifically, but within the solution space where AI is going to help identify some of those data points and surface them faster?
I'd say that there's two buckets. There's the sexy and like, wow, man, that would be really cool. And then there's like the super mundane but highly useful. And so let me touch on the highly useful, super mundane to begin with. Roughly 50% of all calls that go into a 911 center are not emergency related. They are calls about, animal control, calls about tows, calls to just talk because people are lonely. Like just tons of calls come into 911. So there is a use for AI to try to offload. And frankly, like all of our home alarm security systems, there's not a direct connection between your home alarm system and 911. Way too many false positives. All of those get routed through a private monitoring system. When those people deem that it is actually emergency, they call 911. And even amongst those, we still have a huge false positive rate. But all those people are doing are relaying, hey, I have an emergency at 100 Main Street. That's 100 MAIN Street. Like they're just doing that game of telephone. A call audio bot could be used to sort of help automate a bunch of that. So there's this, how do you drain the swamp and allow 911 to truly focus on emergencies and providing a better service without inundating them with, it's just really easy to remember 911 and people call it. So there's a really good use of AI in that space. Now, the sexy stuff. Obviously, within school safety, we're partnering with companies like Zero Eyes, who do object detection. And basically, this is a company started by a couple of, I believe they're ex-Marines, but they do gun detection. And so they tap into camera systems surrounding schools And AI does initial object detection. They have a small cadre of ex-military sort of take a quick look at that AI validated, like, oh, AI thinks that this is a gun. They look at it and they go, yep, probably looks like gun. And then we alert into 911 with that image for the school safety. So it's human backed still, because again, in a lot of these situations, I don't think AI is quite at the level of humans. Like we're dealing with, I think, teenagers at this point. So we give teenager type jobs to AI, and then we check and validate them. But being able to look at 1,000 video feeds all in the same microsecond is the power of where AI is. So there's plenty of opportunity in that sexy space as well. And I think we're targeting kind of those most impactful areas around school safety, active assailant, to try to showcase some of those, because they're very impactful. Well, hopefully low frequency, extremely impactful on communities.
Last question around adoption, because you mentioned something interesting about, public perception, wanting to reach out, those false positives. And actually, I was walking through an airport last week, and I was, watching people stand around and kind of make sure we don't go certain places. And you're like, well, you could probably automate a lot of this stuff. But I was also thinking, it's a real big thing of just having a human there. When another human sees it, they go, oh, that's a place that's off limits. As we're seeing more of what you said, you could, some of the mundane stuff, you can filter stuff out. You could, obviously have a bot. When you kind of are looking at some of those things in adoption of people being comfortable with it being a little bit more hands off, potentially being routed, going through a bot, having a discussion, letting non-humans step in to this chain of, 911, the 911 ecosystem. Is that just a time thing? Is that a human thing where we feel more comfortable hearing somebody else's voice? Or, what are your thoughts there?
I mean, the technology is getting pretty good. Some of these, auto-generated voices
they're hard to tell, to be honest.
They're very close. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think right now, at least in the community who's responsible for this, use of AI in non-life-threatening, non-emergency situations, highly valued. Let's adopt it. Let's see what it can do for us. Inside of the emergency space, again, Copilot gets tossed around across industry here. Very still heavily influenced by the Copilot. How do we still have a human kind of drive, ultimately make the decision? But I think that there's this growing awareness that the digital ecosystem has so much information that humans, we cannot parse it all. But we really need something to help us parse it down and distill it a little bit so that we can get action oriented. I think humans are really good at trying to make those last minute decisions and take on the responsibility for that. I don't think we, at least not within the community that I know right now, they don't want to delegate responsibility. But it's one thing to just take a phone call and that's the only bit of information that you have. But when there is 100, 200, 1,000, 1,000,000 data points, all kind of emerging from a situation, it's more than any one human can kind of ingest quickly. So there is a recognition that synthesis is a great place to have AI kind of consolidate down things and sort of highlight key patterns that a human can then action on.
Awesome, man. I think as we keep speaking, I keep having ideas going. I think I could do this all day. You got to get back to being the hero that doesn't wear a cape, because you guys are doing some really cool stuff. I appreciate your time. If somebody wants to reach out to you to ask a question within relation to the podcast, obviously, what is a good way of connecting with you?
LinkedIn is a great way, open to connections. Zach LaValley on there.
Okay. Awesome, man. Thanks for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Amir, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Two things. One, I think we could have spent hours talking about this because it is really just cool what's happening and understanding how these layers untwine. We didn't even really get to some of the data and more probably sticky stuff. That's maybe down the road type of thing we can revisit with Zach, but share it with somebody else. I think it's really interesting, especially when we're talking about these fault tolerant systems. So much go into it. Please share it. And also like, subscribe, comment, review. Let me know how the podcast is doing. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.